Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Ball, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. We want to thank TBN for this airtime, production time, and the privilege to get the truth to our generation. Now, the title to today's program is Evolution Won't Fly. We'd like to show you evidence. I have a very special guest who's been on the program many times. It's been a while since I've had him back, and it'll be a privilege to welcome him back to the program, Creation in the 21st Century. Now, he has brought with him some vivid illustrations and masterful illustrations of the fact that evolution just won't cut it. It just won't fly. Now, we all know there's variation within kinds. We all vary considerably. Yet, beyond those kinds, there is a gap. There's a bridge that has never been crossed and cannot be. It self-aborts in the process. There's never a demonstration in the fossil record, as we're going to consider today, and throughout the history of investigation, there has never been a bridging from one kind to another. In fact, what we actually find is an impact that we call the global flood of Noah's day. There's evidence for that flood in the geologic deposition, that is, the placement of sedimentary rocks that were placed there because they were waterborne. Sedimentary rocks demonstrate a worldwide flood. And in that flood, we find such things as coelophysis. Dr. Mitchum will say more about this later. Coelophysis is this particular dinosaur, and quite often we find that these dinosaurs were impacted. They did not, as evolution would suppose, find themselves buried and slowly the sedimentation accumulated over them. Instead, we find a suffocation mechanism. We find the neck and the heads arched back. Quite often the tails arched, because we have not only suffocation involved, but we have some electrocution involved. And that is totally consistent with the creation model, with an impact during the worldwide flood. Dr. Mitchum has brought one of his treasure chests. And in that treasure chest is a fish fossil. That fossil is covered with chert, has become chert. And that means that that very hard rock took that fossil very rapidly, encapsulated it, and totally consumed it as a unit. We're talking not about evolutionary progression, but we're talking about an impact, an epoch consistent with biblical creation, scientific creation, and the global flood. But now, I want to introduce my special guest. Personal friend, we've excavated together, we've researched together, Dr. Larry Mitchum. Larry, it's a privilege to have you back on the program.
Good to be back.
And you are one of our primary researchers doing a lot of work. You have your own ministry and your own creation foundation.
We do. We have the Genesis to Jesus ministry now.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, you've been a researcher for long years. There was a time you believed evolutionary theory, espoused it.
I did. Until I heard some of your tapes, and that's been quite a few years ago.
That's been a long while ago.
And I did what we call riding two horses. I had my theory and thinking I would expound on when I was with my academic colleagues.
Oh, yes.
I had another set of rules I followed when I went to church. And I tried to balance that. And it was a little bit of a struggle.
In fact, you are speaking for the vast majority of Christians in this generation.
Theistic evolutionists.
Yes, and they're riding two horses because, Larry, as you know, and you're an excellent researcher, you have degrees all the way through the doctorate. You hold 14 patents with Texas Instruments, and others are pending, and you've been one of their very finest researchers. Much of the technology that we use today points back to some work you did some years ago. So you're able to think and to reason. And as you're able to do so, you have discussed with me over the years the fact that when you really look at what happened, evolution just
If you
won't
really
fly.
look at the facts with an open mind, it's a hard sell. It really is.
Yes.
When you turn off the hype and the rhetoric and just look at the data, it doesn't fly.
Well, today we're going to try to turn off the hype and the rhetoric and just get down to the nuts and bolts of the thing. And talking about it not flying, one of the slides you brought to the program, I was pleased to see some years ago. Here actually is a fly in the fossil record. And would you explain the significance of this slide, please?
Well, there are many definitions on how long it took to build the geological column up, the sedimentary rock, how
Yes.
fast that accumulated. And some say centimeters, 1,000 years. It goes on up to 30,000 per foot. And here on this sign outside of the Fossil Beds National Monument, it says 2 inches equals 1 million years.
Oh, got a problem.
Well, calculate it down. A human hair, 2,500 years required. So here's a fly that's got a body diameter, maybe 1/8 of an inch in diameter, maybe closer to 1/4 of an inch in diameter. How did he sit there without degrading all that time waiting for his body to be covered?
It just won't work. It just will not fly. And here, now that's a specific instance.
And that's a tiny example.
That's a tiny example. And of course, they answer, well, we had an immediate covering of that fly and the material
In that particular moment, and then
moment.
it slowed down again.
However, some of these sedimentary layers are up to 2,000 feet thick, a single layer.
And some of the fossils are up to 30 or 40 feet thick.
Yes. And how could they remain there all of those years, millions of years, in essence, according to evolutionary theory? So that is a specific instance. Here we have the broad sweep of evolutionary theory from early crustaceans all the way to man at the top. But that won't fly, because what we find sorted in throughout that sedimentary geologic column, what we find is this general principle going on, just as we would expect in a worldwide flood.
Hydrological sorting.
Hydrological and hydrodynamic sorting. You are right. Well, Dr. Mitchum, let's begin back here with material you brought to the platform. We all have been schooled with a horse fossil. So surely we have little Eohippus, and at the very bottom, and finally we have the great Clydesdale. Will that fly?
Well, it used to. At least they told us that it would. And they put the pictures in order in the textbook because they thought it made a good story. And for years and years, and the textbook writers have loved this example. But it's not really working because they find this little guy still running around in South America.
Yeah, Hyracotherium.
And in fact, they've actually come out and said, George Simpson, Harvard University, came out and said, this never really happened in nature.
Oh, so...
Yet it still exists in the textbooks.
Still in the textbook, yet the real scholars involved in the research say this never really happened in nature.
And the reason they give for this is, well, it explains the principle very well.
Oh, but that's not good science, and it's certainly not honesty. And that's what we're feeding our children and our scholars in school. In fact, many scholars, you work in a specific area and then you work broadly in order to carry out your ministry and your research. But most PhDs focus in one central area of study. And it could be very closely related to this, but off the envelope, out of the box, and they never see this information, so they assume that the other scholars have this information, and it's a vicious cycle.
And that's the nature of a creationist. You have to put on an astronomy hat, a biology hat, I mean, it's every science imaginable has to be discussed in the creation science. Myself, my background is mechanical engineering, so I kind of have to rely on help from my friends now and then to put all this together. But eventually you start to see the pieces paint the picture that, that is there.
Yes, you do. You're able to see it better than those who work in a narrow field. And of course, you have advanced work in silicon and so forth in your academic work and chips and so forth. Now, what is the significance of the fact that we at Glen Rose, you have participated with us in dinosaur excavations, dinosaur footprint excavations, and human footprint excavations. And we have found to date over 90 human footprints among dinosaur footprints.
Exactly.
And what is
And more than footprints, I might add. You and I have been hanging on the side of a hill sawing a fossil out with a wire saw down in, I believe, in Colombia.
That's correct.
And that was obviously a human remains that were in the very same stratum, the very same layer with the dinosaurs that we were exhuming at the time.
And the museum has a hammer and finger and so forth from that particular time, and a cup from before the dinosaur time. Dr. Louis Jacobs of Southern Methodist University, former president of the American Paleontological Society, wrote In Quest for the African Dinosaur and made a significant statement. Would you bring that to light for us?
Well, basically, he said an occurrence, a co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs would basically throw the theory of evolution out of the water.
Yes.
I mean, to summarize in the sake of time here, and it's iterated by others. Richard Dawkins basically said the same thing. If we find any evidence of men and dinosaur together, evolution is in trouble. It's hanging on the flagpole. And, well, I guess, as you just mentioned earlier, we've got that evidence.
Oh, and we've got, in fact, we're going to show us. We have a house full of it. In fact, as you pointed out here, Dr. Jacobs stated evolution would be vanquished.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Dawkins stated evolution would be utterly destroyed. Evolution would be disproved, would blow the theory of evolution out of the water.
No, this is their words, not ours.
These are their words.
Right.
That's correct. Others have said the same thing. Would you repeat for us what they've said?
Well, SMU, Louis Jacobs says evolution would be vanquished, would disprove evolution. Stephen Stanley of Johns Hopkins. Ugly facts that could kill. Darwinism.
So we're talking about real science and real truth. And the bottom line is evolution just won't fly.
And not beginning evolutionists are saying this. These are big-name people that are making these statements.
That is correct. And you and I both in the past have espoused the theory of evolution. And to show evidence we have, here's a cup. And it was discovered in 1928, and in 48 this statement was made by the discoverer, and that was found completely encased in coal. Now we've examined this before, the Meister track. Larry, you have personally examined the original Meister footprint.
That's one of the fossils we took to the Vienna creation exhibit.
And you were there?
Guarded. I was there when that fossil was revealed, and worldwide cameras came in and zoomed on that. It has been touted by Reader's Digest. If this fossil, this print of this human track, is what it appears to be, it would be in itself sufficient to overturn all conventional accepted ideas of human and geological evolution.
Well, now, if that single fossil is so powerful, what is it? Tell us about this fossil.
Well, it's William Meister and his family were fossil hunting, and they were looking for trilobites. That's the index fossil.
At the bottom of the geologic column.
Yes, the 530 million year old number, the really big one, the really old stratum down at the bottom. They find a human footprint. And not only do they find a human footprint, the guy's wearing shoes. He's wearing a sandal. And it has a leather bottom with stitching going around the top.
With stitching going around it?
Yeah, like these Ouijans we used to wear when we were kids.
Yes.
And he's got both halves of the fossil, and it's clearly, obviously a footprint. You can see the heel in it and everything else. And
even the wear, you know, which, that it was a right footprint because it has the wear on the right outside of the heel.
It is the perfect smoking gun. It's just totally ignored by the secular community. And it's one of the highlights of the Creation Evidence Museum.
I agree, and the actual fossilized sandal print is there, and it's in Cambrian rock, and as you have already stated.
And one more point we might add, the walker stepped on 2 trilobites and crushed them.
Oh,
okay?
really?
Yeah, one in the toe, one in the heel. No, that's like a smoking gun of smoking guns.
And crushed them.
Well, those are index fossils, remember?
Yes.
That's the key fossil you look for to date the layer, which means that sandal print was made, if that is all correct, 530 some odd million years ago.
Either that, it was either made 530 million years ago, crushing the trilobites. Those trilobites didn't migrate in, they were crushed by the weight of the sandal. Either the trilobites and man were there 530 million years ago, or
something's wrong with the numbers here.
Something's wrong with the numbers, and that geologic column does not represent evolutionary progression over long geologic time.
Amen.
Instead, the worldwide flood of Noah's day occurred, and what happened was in that flood early, those trilobites were stepped on by a human being early in the flood, less than 5,000 years ago.
Still had his shoes on.
Still had his shoes on. Took them off later so he could swim a little bit. Now, I like this. Would you point out the importance of this fossil record will not confirm?
Well, Darwin basically had a concern about his theory, and that is intermediates were not being found back then. And he commented that surely they'll be found in time. These gaps will be filled in. Unfortunately, the fossil record is not delinquent. We have over 200 million fossils in the world. They're all over the place. And not yet one legitimate missing link is showing up.
Yeah, 200 million fossils in archives, billions of fossils outside.
And another 200 million in my driveway and my creek bed out behind my house, where I found this fish head I brought in today.
I've walked on some of them.
Exactly.
So you pointed out something very important. Then, this is a major problem for evolutionary theory and evolutionists. It is the stasis problem, that certain life forms are found extant today and are found in the fossil record, and they're identical after so many millions or hundreds of millions of years. Point out the importance of that beautiful fossil, please.
Well, so what happened there? I mean, think about it. If evolution works, why are the chimpanzees still having chimpanzees?
Sure.
Why are the amoebas still look like amoeba?
Sure.
Why do the trilobites still look like trilobites? And so on and so on and so on. Here's a mantis shrimp. And he has a unique capability as a fast claw-killing motion that's been clocked as the fastest animal motion in air or water. I mean, it's pretty incredible. And yet he has not changed one iota from the fossil record. So what is going on here?
Oh.
It seems like the original copies are looking strangely similar to the same animals we see running around today.
It looks like they appeared totally intact. In fact, he has been found in rock that is assigned an age of 400 million years. Assigned an age of 400 million years.
Quite a while.
But of course, all of this was recent and deposited in the worldwide flood. Now, in these final moments of the program, we have some statements to make here. Well, we started with coelophysis. Larry, give us just a thumbnail sketch of the importance of this fossil, please.
Well, you explained it very well, I thought, in the opening there. The thing that really strikes me about this fossil, I grew up on a farm, and we all the time would run across skeletons of horses and cows and things like that, and there'd be bones all over the place.
Sure.
And the animal only died 6 months ago, maybe 2 years ago. Every bone in here is intact. They're articulated, you might say.
Yes,
Okay.
intact, in place.
Mm-hmm. So look at that. I mean, it's like this guy just got put in between the leaves of a huge book and sandwiched. Mm-hmm. And even his ribs are down there. Now remember, this guy had some diameter when he was alive.
Yes.
So all of these things got pushed down into a plane. And if that had not have happened, what we would see here is instead of a whole rib, what we would see would be the cross section. It'd be like a computer slice file, if you will. And you'd see some of the bones here, some of the bones there. And to get all the animal in, you'd have a really contorted background.
Yes.
This background's almost dead flat. That suggests to me this guy fell on the ground. Something covered him up really quick before he had time to lose his composure.
And flattened his profile.
Yes, and before the predators came in and carried who knows what off here, there, and everywhere. You can't even find a dead deer nowadays that stays intact more than a couple of weeks.
That's right.
This
the predators
really,
get to them.
This really screams for rapid fossilization.
Rapid fossilization, as we would expect in the worldwide flood. Now, in the conclusion, point out to us the significance of this Cambrian explosion, etc.
Well, Mr. Mott's here, Mikhail Mott's. I don't know if he's PhD or not. I'm guessing he is,
Yes,
UT
he
of
is.
Austin.
Yes.
He has a comment here that I think just says it all. He calls the Cambrian explosion a magical moment where it appeared that all of the animals, including the phylum Chordata, you know, that's the guys like us.
The vertebrates.
Yeah, spinal
now,
cords.
To explain, that's at the bottom of the geologic column, way down there.
Cambrian, yes, the
Yes.
very bottom, where we're
Yes.
talking about the Mysoprene. At the very
Right.
beginning, the supposed crudest and simplest life forms were supposed to have evolved. He says all of the creatures just jumped out of a box right then and there.
Yes.
And that's what the fossil record seems to say.
That's right. So this
And Stanley
screams-
basically says the same thing,
Same
John
thing.
Hopkins.
Very, very same thing. And then Richard Dawkins, the world's leading atheist of this hour, what does he have to say?
Well, he says basically the same thing. He says in his own words, it is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history.
Yeah.
Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists.
Right, and he certainly is not a creationist. He's not only an evolutionist.
Again, their words.
Their words, that's right, their own words, and we're not planting those words in their mouths, but they're acknowledging that we really have an academic point and a point in truth.
And a serious problem that's not brought out in the textbooks.
Yes, unfortunately.
Not emphasized. That this is really a theory, and it has a lot of holes in it. And those holes should be explored, and people should have reasons and explanations for what's wrong.
Our students deserve better than they're getting. And here we have the father of modern geology has made a statement. Nicholas Steno, would you tell us about this?
Well, let me just summarize all this. This is pretty much their Bible as far as it comes to the geological column. This is what you study. Guys like Dr. Patton really knows this book well. Me being a mechanical engineer, never got it in school. But the note to notice here about Steno is, Steno believed in the universal flood. If you read the preface here, he says, dedicated to the proof of the Noachian deluge.
Yes, the father of modern geology. And yet the geologists, paleontologists, physical examiners of the evidence just ignore their forebear and present a philosophy that is basically untrue. Now the transitional forms. Darwin recognized it was a problem getting one form to another.
Well, we mentioned this slide on the other side over there. And Darwin, he acknowledged that countless numbers of intermediates should certainly exist should my theory be true. Unfortunately, that has not proven to be the case. In fact, it's exactly the opposite.
Exactly.
Back then, they had what they thought were more transitionals than they do now, because those transitionals have actually been identified as basic species of their own accord.
Oh, you've got it, Larry. You've got it. And the late Stephen Jay Gould emphasized this again.
Well, yes, again, this is talking about the Cambrian explosion. He says not only the phylum Chordata itself, but all of its major divisions basically just exploded in this Cambrian explosion, which really kind of throws this tree, you know, showing one migrating to another, to another, to another, to another, out of the water as far as what the data speaks.
And it flattens it into one time frame. And of course, Eugene Conan, all the diverse body parts appear to emerge in a single geological instant. And then would you point out these rules, and we'll close the program today.
Okay. One more comment on what Stephen Jay Gould said. He said, since the so-called Cambrian explosion, no new phyla have entered the fossil record. Now, I didn't say that. That was Stephen Jay Gould that said that.
Major statement. And very quickly, what about these two rules?
Well, this is what always gets me. If you're a scientist, you want to know why something is.
Yes.
Okay? If somebody tells you something is this because of that, and then they tell you that is this because of this, that's circular reasoning.
Yes.
And that's pretty much the fundamentals of the geological column, and that is that the rocks date the fossils, and then the fossils date the rocks.
And that is circular reasoning. Would you make a comment on this fossil record and the sparsity?
Okay, let me just say this to all the kids out there that are looking at their book and seeing the migration of these animals, and college students too, for that matter, the higher education as well. And you see all these vertebrates, these chimpanzees and monkeys and apes and elephants and giraffes. 95% of all fossils are marine invertebrates.
Certainly.
4.5% more are plants and algae. So to get a vertebrate, you are like 0.0125% of all fossils found. Now you look at that picture in the book and it's obviously skewed, drastically skewed towards vertebrates. I don't know why, but I think the reason is if they put it according to what it actually was, somebody might think there would have been a flood.
Yes, very well stated. And that brings us to these moments to apply it to our lives and your life. Dr. Mitchum has come to the program today to inform us about the truth of scientific investigation. And that truth leads us to realize that when you really question the scholars involved, they say, well, it's not really like it appears, but we know it happened, so therefore we leave in the textbook certain factors in place that are not exactly correct, but they tell a good story because we know in general this happened. Oh, do we know it happened like this? In fact, there's an incredible book called the Bible. There's an incredible record of human history without a single flaw and a single error in any detail. There's an incredible explanation as to what it was like before the flood. And when we examine the fossil record, we find that's exactly what it was like. Larger life forms before this worldwide flood because we had a canopy condition described in the scriptures in a pre-flood world. One day, that's all going to be restored. Are you ready for that day? First of all, do you know the Creator? You can know Him. You can know Him in the closing moments of this broadcast today. You can know Him right now. Just pray this simple prayer with me. Dear God, I'm a sinner. Thank you for explaining my origin and my destiny in your word. Jesus is my only answer. Lord Jesus, right now, I open my heart to you. Right now, I ask you to step into my heart, forgive my sins, cover me with your blood. And Lord Jesus, thank you for dying for me, and I will serve you with all my heart.
Creation in the 21st Century has been sponsored by Trinity Broadcasting Network. And only with your love gift of support can this program stay on the air. So write to Creation in the 21st Century, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.